Hi everyone, it's Dr. Ramani. Welcome back to this YouTube channel on narcissism, narcissistic relationships, and healing from narcissistic relationships, just understanding them. We're going to talk about this idea that everybody talks about, I don't want to get into a narcissistic relationship, tell me how to not get into one. It's the getting in's not the issue. The real issue with narcissistic relationships is the getting stuck. Because that's right, the whole thing, like tell us how to prevent this, right? Everybody out there wants to know, how can I tell if my new partner, this new person I know, how can I tell if they're narcissistic? How can I avoid getting into a narcissistic relationship? What are the biggest red flags? What are the questions I can ask? They're kind of the wrong questions because you're probably not going to be able to get there that quickly. The real issue is that this isn't about the getting in, right? We're never going to live in a world where charm and charisma are not alluring, nor are we ever going to live in a world where every child is protected from toxic and adverse problematic family systems. So people are going to have, just being in this world and what we value, in a way everyone is vulnerable to narcissistic relationships. Ultimately, the narcissistic folks are going to be attractive. So I don't really think it's realistic we're going to get ahead of this unless you really, really are willing to go against the tide and say, yep, nope, not going with the things that I was told are attractive. The getting stuck is the problem, though, and I've said that before on this channel. Lots of people also want to know, how long is a love bombing going to last? How long does it take to figure out if someone is narcissistic? After many years of doing this, I have to say that it takes someplace between 1 to 2 years to figure out if you're in a relationship with someone narcissistic. You often need that many toxic patterns to accumulate, that much data, that many bad examples without good ones to counter them. By 1 to 2 years, most people are clear. Doesn't mean everyone leaves at that point. And listen, 1 to 2 years is not a short amount of time. And many people feel angry and foolish about taking that long, but that's what it seems to take. There may be enough that you like about this person, that the idea of stepping away too soon and the possible regret that you don't have enough warning signs, enough invalidating experiences to confidently base this decision on, can keep people sticking around to get enough of the intel to make a decision, not to mention that you might enjoy some of the time you're spending with this person. Getting stuck is tough, especially once there are practical ties that bind you. Extracting from narcissistic relationships is very difficult. And when you throw in the invisible locks and chains of trauma bonds, that can feel almost impossible to shed. It's less about red flags than it is about figuring out how to step back from a situation that might feel good or even familiar, but in the long term is going to take a toll on your health. All of this is made more complicated if you do have a past history of trauma bonding. So then the inconsistency and the invalidating may foster that complicated tie and connection that is made worse by all of the up and down and the chaos and the good and the good and the bad. And you hold on to that roller coaster until you get to the point where it is no longer a roller coaster. It's just a really problematic train that you're still struggling to get off of. So more and more time passes, and while you're gathering this data and information and watching the patterns, and in some cases, you may not even recognize that it's an issue. For example, if you don't know what narcissism is, or perhaps if the way the relationship is going is consistent with what you grew up with, and it may be the only relationship template that you have. The real issue becomes the getting stuck. Spend enough time in any relationship, and you may move in together. You may get engaged. You may get married. You may have a child. And these are really strong practical ties. Stay in the toxic job long enough, and you may get hooked into it in a way that makes it harder to move to another job. Put down those boundaries for a minute. You said, oh, okay, I'm going to go ahead and interact with my toxic family. And you may find that you are now back in the family group text, moving closer to them, or getting pulled into their gravitational pull. The getting stuck is far more important than paying attention to red flags and all the rest of it. Sure, it helps to know the problem patterns, but those aren't red flags as much as they are interpersonal behaviors that should not be tolerated, like being chronically invalidated or mocked or gaslighted or manipulated or betrayed or lied to. This isn't even about narcissism then. It's about a person behaving in an unacceptable manner. And even if that's juxtaposed against some great days or a real sense of attraction or enjoying their company at times, I hate to sound like a cynic, but I guess I am. Judge it on the bad days, because that's the stuff that's ultimately going to come around and harm you. Listen, if you're in a relationship where you happen to like different kinds of pizza, or you don't like the same kinds of movies, or you're bothered by their snoring, or you don't like the same kind of weather, that doesn't make a relationship toxic. But insulting a person or gaslighting them or betraying them, because you do have different preferences, well, that does. How do you not get stuck? Well, you talk about it. Therapy helps, as can support groups or even trusted friends. Do the work on you before you get in too deep with anyone. Know yourself. Learn what constitutes healthy. Trust your body. It's so much more honest, and your body doesn't know how to rationalize. It only knows that something ungood is in your presence, and it sends you signals, and you feel uncomfortable. Pay attention and know those signals within yourself. Don't be afraid to cut your losses. If it takes 18 months to figure it out, that wasn't a waste. 18 years, a different conversation. But even after all those years, you learn something about yourself and about relationships. Learning this, determining you're in a narcissistic relationship takes some time, and that means slowing down. One reason people get stuck is that the relationship hits the accelerator early on when it comes to narcissistic relationships. And as a result, there are deeper roots into the relationship, and that can foster the cognitive dissonance and the buy-in. Listen, relax. Enjoy the first few weeks or months in a relationship if it's going well. Don't make it about a mission to find a bunch of red flags, but rather about paying attention to how you feel. Don't make it about figuring out if they're narcissistic, but rather paying attention to their consistency. Be mindful of justifications and even self-devaluing language you might be using. If you grew up in a narcissistic family or had a past history of narcissistic relationships, slow down. And please, oh please, give it a year before you enter a new relationship after ending a toxic one. With families, obviously this is all harder, but some of the same rules apply. However, it can be deeper work because you are pulled into their vortex of guilt, manipulation, fear, and that child self within you still wanting the narcissistic parent to see you and love you. All of us, if you're watching this channel, have gotten into these relationships. It's about finding that sweet spot of staying long enough to see it, but not so long that we can give ourselves permission to leave without wasting more years than needed. But for a lot of people, they also want to make sure that they don't jump ship too fast, because then you may get pulled back in because you'll believe like, oh, you didn't see it clearly, you didn't take enough time. See it clearly, then get unstuck. And what I'm suggesting is easier said than done, but slowing down is always your friend. Thanks again.